Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. I really wanted to start another video in a really positive manner, talking about a sixth consecutive victory for Tottenham Hotspur, but it was not to be. It was one of those North London derbies at the Emirates Stadium. I just realised coincidentally I'm wearing a Back to the Future t-shirt, which kind of sums it up really. It was like so many matches there from the past. Spurs getting themselves into a decent position in the game, score-wise, and then managing to throw it away. Obviously, we'll delve into the game a little bit deeper. But do you know what? I do want to start with a little bit of positive news. Just something positive, something to cling on to by our fingertips. As I understand it, at least Son Heung-min's injury is not a bad one. Thank goodness for that. That's something we can cling on to. Obviously, left the game after about 19 minutes. Pulled up, Toby Alderweireld, long ball over the top that was just too far for him, and he pulled up as he ran for it, holding his hamstring. But as I understand it, he's going to be okay. He technically, ideally, I think they'd want him back for the Newcastle match just after the international break, which would give him time to kind of recover, recuperate, recharge his batteries as one of Mourinho's most used players. But there is a chance he could potentially play against Villa this weekend, which creates an interesting dynamic because South Korea have arranged depends how you want to look at it, a friendly, let's just put it there without any adjectives before it, a friendly in Japan. Obviously, with the world as it is right now, that's probably not ideal for many reasons. And certainly for Son, at a time when he's just had this injury and really needs a rest. It's not great. So I suppose if Spurs and Mourinho were to select him for Sunday against Villa, then you're lessening the case somewhat of being able to say to South Korea, look, it's not in his best interest to travel and play because, you've already used him. If he doesn't play against Villa, then ideally you could have him essentially have 3 weeks off. Not off because he'll be doing training, but 3 weeks away from games, getting some recuperation time. And then you could see a very different Sonny in the second half of the season. I say very different. We don't want him too different because he's had a magnificent season, but just he's looked slightly tired in recent kind of weeks, I'd say. So if you could get him recharged, then that could be a massive plus. So there you go. Let's put a little bit of positivity in there to start with, because there's not going to be too much more, obviously, as loads of people just hit stop now or change over to a different video. But we've got to delve into it. We can't hide from it, like unfortunately I think some of the players did on Sunday. We can't do that. We've got to delve into it and we've got to tackle kind of head on some of the things that cropped up. I mean, I've touched on it there. I do feel, and I don't know whether this is everyone's viewpoint. I just felt so disappointed at the intensity or lack of for a North London derby. Many of these guys out there, and what was it, the 14 players that played on the pitch throughout the entire game had played in many of these North London derbies before. Not everyone. It was Tanguy Ndombele's first one, but the intensity levels, the desire. Only one team as a unit really wanted to win that match. And, everyone's blame. No one is blameless. I think Mourinho made some decisions that weren't particularly great, but I also think the players have got to take a lot of accountability as well. You know what I'm like. I'm not really one for singling people out unless there's an absolutely horrific error, produced. I kind of feel that Sunday was a bit of a culmination of everything. What I would say is, I think some of the easy go-to stuff after the match was, negative football, negative Mourinho football. I don't really agree with that aspect of it. I do think Mourinho made mistakes, but I don't think it was in that aspect. Because, quite frankly, if you've got a team that's got, let's look at the starting 11. You've got Kane, Son, Bale, Lucas Moura, Ndombele all starting. I don't think you can say that team can even naturally, even if told to, can keep a tight defensive nature to its game. We're going to come on to this a little bit when we talk about the right-back position, but if you look at the players that played in the first game against Arsenal, you had a lot more kind of defensively minded players in that team. And you could really look at it and say that Spurs beat Crystal Palace 4-1, And actually, Mourinho took 10 of those players from that game and swapped Harry Winks out for a more attacking player in Son Heung-min. So if anything, he put out an even more attacking team than he had against Crystal Palace at home. So I'm not a massive fan of that, that's the way it was set up. Yes, there were moments when they didn't push forward, but where does the blame lie on that? I just can't believe myself that one man can make all of those attacking players not want to drive on and not want to drive forward, because even a defensive side, with that amount of quality on their counter-attack, should still be sweeping up that pitch, especially against a team like Arsenal who've got such defensive vulnerability right now. Again, I could hear it. This is something you've heard me say before, but I constantly hear it on the sideline. I could hear it again on Sunday. That Mourinho shouting press, Mourinho shouting players' names. It's often names you hear with Mourinho. It's saying like Harry, press, Sonny, or Tongi, and it's as if to say, get up there, get up onto the ball or attack the space. João Sacramento does it as well. I think João Sacramento uses the word press more than any human on earth. But they weren't. And, I wrote a piece yesterday kind of going into, it annoys me. It does annoy me. I don't want to put all the blame on the players. Because obviously, like I say, there were other mistakes made as well by Mourinho and by the officials, although I don't think we can go too hard on the official side of things, because I think Spurs more contributed to their own downfall than anything else. But certainly, we saw this in Pochettino's final 4 months, I'd say, maybe even towards the end of the previous season as well. I remember asking Pochettino whether he was happy with the pressing efforts, even after victories, and he'd say, no, I want more from them, and they're not doing it. And you kind of feel like, yes, there's some new players in there, but the bulk of these players are players that have been there during Pochettino era as well. And you just kind of feel they're, in their own words, Kane and Lloris have both said for some reason they have this natural thing not told to them by the manager to sit back, especially when they go a goal up. They just sit back and invite pressure on themselves, like trying to keep the lead rather than take risks. And I think you really saw that on Sunday. It's got to be frustrating. Yes, I'm sure Mourinho will have said to them in certain aspects he wanted them to be more defensive and launch on counter-attacks. But just take the fullbacks, for example. Obviously, we're going to come to Doherty in a bit, but the fullbacks, I watched them really closely because I did wonder whether, as in the home game, whether they'd have more of a stay in your own half brief from Mourinho. They didn't. Both Reguilon and Doherty were pushing right up to the edge of the Arsenal area at times. You saw Reguilon with the goal, with Lamella's goal. That was him cushioning the ball across. There was no indication from me that the team themselves had been told not to attack space, not to get up that pitch and just sit and soak up stuff completely. That just didn't look the case. And I feel like, for me, big players just didn't turn up on the day. There is no way that... Harry Kane came alive, I'd say, in the last 15 minutes or so. But if you had at least two, I think I touched on this last video, if you had at least two of Kane, Son obviously for 19 minutes, which is a bit harsh, and Bale firing, along with Lucas Moura, you're going to make stuff happen. Yes, Bale put in the long ball that led to the first goal, but ultimately didn't do much. He went off. Mourinho took him off, I think it was about 57 minutes, and Bale looked furious, wouldn't even look at Mourinho as he came off. And I'd hope that, whether or not in the moment, but on reflection, there was a lot of anger, kind of frustrating with himself, because I just felt he didn't produce on the day. And after some recent terrific performances in North London derby, you absolutely wanted him going for it. And I just kind of felt on the day that there were only a couple. I'd say maybe, certainly from defence forwards, I'd say probably only Lucas and Lamella, and obviously he blotted his copybook, but I'd say only those two were players you really felt wanted to give everything to win that game, win that derby match. I looked at some of the stats into how many touches players had, and some of these, when you really look at it, are ridiculous. Son, in his 19 minutes, only 4 touches of the ball. 4 touches. I don't want to go in hard on Son because he was barely on the pitch, and we don't know what he would have done for the rest of the match. Who else do we have? Bale, on for 57 minutes, 22 touches of the ball. Kane, on for the entire 95 minutes, 27 touches of the ball. On Dembele, in the actual hub of everything that should have been happening, just 39 touches of the ball. Højbjerg a bit more, 64. But I think, you could maybe argue, someone could look at that and say, oh, well, there you go, the attacking players weren't getting the ball. But the person that destroys that, really, for me, is Lucas Moura. Lucas Moura touched the ball 68 times. So that's more than any of those players. That's more than double Kane, more than three times what Bale, how many times Bale touched the ball. So that tells me, if you wanted that ball, you could go and get it, and you could do stuff with it. And I think that showed on the pitch. I think Lucas, especially second half, was really trying to. He got an assist in the first half, and for me, someone that is quite tough on Lucas because I always expect more from him with the talent he's got. I think he was a kind of a shining light in terms of showing the others, look, you can get the ball, go and get it yourselves. Don't wait for it. Don't just stand there and wait and hope it comes to you. It was some really basic stuff that I felt wasn't being done. And again, I don't want to absolve Mourinho for blame, and we'll come to the things that I think he kind of did slightly wrong. But for me, it was about the intensity. And I asked the first question in the press conference, and I said to him, look, this was a North London derby. You've got to be disappointed with the intensity put in, particularly in the awful first half. And he said, I agree with you. 200% I agree with you. He said it just wasn't there. There wasn't the movement into space. There wasn't the pressing. There wasn't the aggression. There wasn't the intensity that I wanted. And it was only in the second half where we started to improve. And then obviously things went against them in terms of decisions on the pitch. But North London derby, the least in any game that people can ask for is passion and intensity from their players. But not to see it in a North London derby, especially with Spurs' wretched record at the Emirates. It's 10 years since they last won in the Premier League there. And Bale was playing that day. So you think anyone that knows it more than anyone would be Gareth Bale. But, yeah, it was so disappointing. So Mourinho, obviously, this is the trouble, I think. I find this on social media. You're either one thing or another. So if I say that I felt the players, really weren't great, and let the side down really on the day, a few of them were. Mourinho said it afterwards. Players were hiding, big players were hiding, and I agree. I do think they were. I think that needed. It was a day for leaders to emerge, and they didn't. But yeah, so if I say that after a match, suddenly you're giving Mourinho all the excuses in the world. You love Mourinho and all that. Honestly, I think hopefully if anyone's watched these videos, hopefully my aim is to probably be as objective as possible across the board, is to not go in crazy on anyone, go in silly directions. So I'm not saying that Mourinho was blameless at all. I think Mourinho, for me, the big mistake he made, in my eyes, was how he dealt with Matt Doherty. Matt Doherty, he had a nightmare, but I think that was also partly due to the fact that the poor guy was left utterly exposed. Let's talk about the moment that I do think he deserves criticism for. The goal itself, just before half-time, absolutely skinned by Kieran Tierney. That, for me, there's no excuses for that because it was a one-on-one. He just absolutely tore him apart, cut the ball in for Odegaard to then knock a ball off of Alderweireld's legs into the net. That there's no excuses for. Doherty, that's just poor defending. That's being beaten far too easily, and he will be incredibly disappointed with that. What I felt, he was then onto a hiding. He was pretty much on a hiding to nothing from the start of the game, though, because of the way Spurs set up down that right-hand side. I saw lots of people afterwards saying, why didn't you pick Aurier, blah, blah, blah. And I get that. And I certainly get the frustration with Doherty as well, especially in that moment in his performance. But the problem with the setup was that a guy who, you might feel that he defensively is worse than Aurier. I don't know. Maybe Aurier this season, I think, has probably been a better defender. And this is definitely something Doherty has to work on. But for me, I still think Aurier in that position would have had a really tough day as well. And that's because of the setup. So I take you back to the home game at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Spurs obviously won on the day. So Sergio Aurier on that day had ahead of him Moussa Sissoko in midfield, doing what he always does, which is come across to the right and cover. And on top of that, had Steven Bergwijn, an absolute workhorse in front of him, constantly coming. Bergwijn that day was brilliant. He essentially played as a wing back in front. It was like, if you remember the home game just towards the end of last season, when on the left, Lucas Moura and I think it was Ben Davies essentially were playing both as left backs. It's not sexy football, but my goodness, it did its job down that left-hand side. And in the home game this season, it was a bit similar in that you had Bergwijn, Sissoko, both protecting Aurier, which was massive for him. On Sunday, Doherty had Gareth Bale, who at 31 years old, we know that's not his strength. He's not going to get back and help out and cover and tackle. And he had no Sissoko either. So he had Højbjerg occasionally. Højbjerg's probably better covering on the left-hand side, but he was over on the right and occasionally trying to help out, but it wasn't great. He wasn't tracking a lot of midfield runs. And at one time he did. And I do wonder whether a lot of people thought this was Doherty that this happened to, but I very kind of clearly watched it back on some of the stuff the next morning just to make sure. There's one moment when it's Højbjerg gets absolutely skinned by Tierney down the left-hand side and the ball's put into the box. Absolutely tears him apart and gets to the touchline, which I do wonder whether people thought that was Doherty at the time, but it wasn't. It was actually Højbjerg coming across. So, again, not saying Doherty didn't have a poor game, he did. He wasn't good, but I do think there were contributing factors as well, and that he got utterly left exposed. They were doubling up. Obviously, they'd looked before the match, and especially when they saw the lineup, they thought, well, go for him. Why not? And they were constantly doubling up down that left. And he was in that situation where he was like, who do I go for? And so he was out of position so many times. And obviously, from the outside, that looks like Doherty's done it again. What a mess. What a nightmare. Are you still going to back... Oh, the amount of people on Twitter after the game was, are you still going to back him? It's like, well, to be honest, supporters should always back him. You know, that's not my job. That's kind of a supporter's job. But I do feel that he was on a hiding to nothing. He was kind of almost set up to fail with the system, and that's on Mourinho. You know, was that the match for Sissoko? Was that the match to not play with Dembele and Højbjerg? Was it the game to play with either Winks or Sissoko and have someone covering him? Was it... And it's a huge... These are big decisions. You can understand why he wouldn't make them, but was it the match to not play Bale? And to have a workhorse like Bergwijn or Lucas in front of Doherty to help him out. You know, Reguilon had certainly Son really working back in those opening minutes. And then Lucas switched across to the left and was really working hard in front of him as well. So I do feel that, yes, Doherty deserves criticism. And I think I gave him like a 4 in my ratings. But I would add the caveat that I don't think he had any help. He had, you know, and I do also believe that Serge Aurier in that same situation, we'd be probably talking about the game about him getting overrun and having lots of problems as well. But yeah, you know, just wanted to not stick up for him, just wanted to point out the whole context of what I felt were mistakes on Mourinho's part, which kind of also contributed there as well to that. But yeah, it really wasn't great. It wasn't. It was. I mean, when you look at it in the grand scheme of it, I wouldn't say that Arsenal battered Tottenham. I think I looked at it, I think both sides had 3 shots on target. Possession in the end, which in the first half looked like it was going one way, ended up something like 53-47. I wouldn't say they battered them, but obviously they hit the woodwork twice. Spurs hit it once late on. I just felt they wanted it more. I think that's what you saw on the day. And bearing in mind, they didn't even have Aubameyang playing because disciplinary stuff. I think it's believed that he was late for the day, for the game, which is... I think that's a cracking stand to take. I think that's a really good, strong stand. Not to go into an Arsenal analysis, but I thought that really would have spoke volumes to the team. That even, you know, their star player essentially was told, you mess up, you're not in there, mate. And obviously to get the win without him, you know, I suppose kudos to Arteta for that. But yeah, I just felt that Arsenal on the day wanted it more. And that's poor. That's really poor from a Tottenham's perspective. Let's talk about Eric Lamela. Let's talk about positive first. Oh, that goal. That goal, honestly, one of the most audacious, impudent, ridiculously beautiful goals in a North London derby. It's such a shame that it will be repeated and replayed before every North London derby now for the rest of time. However, because of what he did later in the game, it will always be replayed with the caveat, oh yeah, he got himself sent off after that. I think he was only the 5th Premier League substitute in the history of the competition to come off the bench, score and get sent off in the game. And the goal was so Eric Lamela. It was so Eric Lamela. A little touchback, that Rabona shot, and I love someone has done the 11 on the back of his shirt with one of the ones just across. Yes, it's possibly the biggest showing that he cannot use his right foot. Of course it is. But my God, the way it just zipped forward and a little bit of curl. So when you're behind the ball, it just looked even better. It was beautiful. It really was up there with the best ever North London derby goals. But unfortunately, it's one that will always be tinged and tainted by the fact that it had a sending off afterwards for the player and also came in a defeat. Yeah, another defeat at the Emirates. But yeah, it's beautiful goal. Beautiful goal. Bale across crossfield ball. Reguilon, cushion past. Lucas touch off. And then Lamela with that. I mean, Reguilon's face, it's like the Scream painting as he ran behind and was trying to process what had just happened. And the irony is, with Lamela, it's not something like, wow, that's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Because he's done it before. Was it against Asteros Tripolis? I can't remember who it was. In Europa League. Obviously, that one, I'd say, was more of a potentially, I suppose you could say, technique-wise, an even better kind of curling effort from edge of the box higher. But I think this, with the stakes involved, was a better goal. It's just incredible. And Lamela was overhyped for the game. Everything, it was almost like his superhero power was to absorb all of the intensity and aggression from every other player on the pitch and put it into his own performance, because there was some iffy moments, there was some kicking out, there was some little Lamela things that he did. But I thought overall, I think the thing with Lamela, which kind of why I don't like it when people lay into him so much, is that he cares. He really does care, and you could see that out there. And what even the goal meant to him. When he was warming up to come on, Mourinho was shouting in Portuguese, like I think it was "vai, vai, vai," as in "go, go, go," because Lamela was taking his time to get on. And when he scored the goal, he absolutely roared at the bench and Mourinho Lamela as if to say, "Well, was that not worth the wait?" kind of thing. And I think that's the thing with Lamela. You always get his 100%, always. You can never level that against him. But I just feel that obviously it's slightly boiled over. First yellow card. It's one of those where, old school players, the likes of probably Graham Roberts, people like that would say, it's a cracking challenge. Got the ball, just happened to be his trailing leg, took him out. What are you going to do with that trailing leg? But I think in today's game, it's probably seen as slightly over the top and aggressive, and that's why it got that yellow card. Second one, I'd say there's less excuse for, especially only coming 7 minutes after the first yellow card. He's whacked his arm out. Yes, you could say he's trying to shield the ball, but that's very intentional. He's put his forearm out and he's clattered him in the face. Whatever you think about the contact and whether it deserved his reaction or that, I don't know. To be honest, I didn't analyse that side of it too much. I just felt it was silly. You can see Mourinho's face. Mourinho's like, it's like he just knew in that moment what was going to happen. What annoyed me most, not most about it, but what annoyed me about it was the fact that it feeds this narrative of Lamela always going to be a player. He's always likely to get himself sent off or yellow card and all that. And that's rubbish. It's rubbish. It's one of these manufactured things because of the way he plays. I mean, Mourinho once told me he's chaotic in the way he plays, but in a good way. And I think that perfectly sums it up. But I think that almost tricks people's minds into thinking, he's a liability, someone that's always going to get himself sent off. That was his first ever sending off for Tottenham in 8 years. And to put that even to bigger context, it was only the second sending off his career. His first one came in a Coppa Italia game for Roma years back, I think 2012, I think it was. So 356 games, 2 red cards. This is not a guy who's a liability and often going to get sent off. He just isn't whatsoever. Even the yellow card thing, he's a book in a game. Gets booked, I looked it up, on average every 6 matches. He's none of these things that people make him out to be. Be frustrated with his injuries, of course, as I'm sure he is more than anyone. But you cannot say that he is a guy that is a liability. But unfortunately, on Sunday, It kind of proved himself to be in that moment, and it just feeds that narrative, which I think is so frustrating. But yeah, and of course, that weird kind of knock-on effect that Spurs played better after that. And that, I think, is almost more frustrating than the lack of intensity in the first half, is that they come alive after adversity hits them. Why not just come alive at the start so you don't have to try and rebound? It's very frustrating. It's become a really common theme as well. It's like they need a slap in the face to wake up for some reason. I don't know why. I've touched them earlier, but Dembele and Højbjerg in the middle I thought were really disappointing. Dembele's first North London derby, this could have been his moment to make his impact. The thing that's still levelled against him is he there in the big games? He was very good against Man U earlier in the season, but I think other than that, maybe hasn't always been there. And that's something that his near namesake and kind of predecessor in the role that everyone wants to grow into, Moussa Dembele, did. He was there in big games, Moussa Dembele. And I just thought Dembele, he kind of went missing. Like I say, how many touches? I say 39 touches from Dembele. For a guy in the centre of the pitch, that's not good enough. He was pushed up into a number 10 role for like about 5 minutes before Dele came on. And I don't like Bale. I don't think he can complain about his performance. Mourinho picked them both out after the game. And to be fair, he wasn't going to. He wasn't going to name anyone individually. But then he was asked, why did you take them off? And then he kind of had to explain his decision. He just went intensity. It wasn't there. He needed people to come on and really want it and desire and want to win the ball and stuff. And I thought Højbjerg, who's been brilliant this season, looked tired. I just kind of didn't look as up for it as you kind of expected him to. You thought he'd be launching into tackles and being a general pain in the backside. In the home game, he was player of the match for me. He was absolutely brilliant. And it kind of really showed the difference between the two teams, and he was the midfield general that Spurs had needed. In this game, it was almost like he kind of coasted through it a bit. And he's such an important player for Spurs now. He's such a leader. He's such a guy that pushes everyone on. And if he's not doing it, it really does send out kind of almost like shockwaves across the rest of the team. So those two, really, really disappointed. And I think Winks and Sissoko will likely play in the Europa League game midweek. And I think they've got a great shout to put themselves forward to start at Villa with any semblance of a decent performance, to be honest. Right, we've got to talk about the refereeing. Like I say, I wanted to kind of get everything else out of the way first because I think there was dubious stuff, especially with the penalty, but I didn't think it was game-changing. I think Spurs did that to themselves. But we've spoken about the red card, the second yellow card. Penalty, it was one of those where in the moment I looked at it, I thought, why has he done that? But the more and more I see replays, the more and more it's not a penalty. It's not. And I think the fact that we're now... And actually, to be fair to them, at the time you saw Freddie Ljungberg on Sky came straight out and said it was very lucky to be a penalty. Martin Keown on Match of the Day 2 said it was very lucky. And Dermot Gallagher the next day said, it's not really a penalty. I think we're now kind of seeing what happened. In the moment, I thought Davinson Sanchez had come across, clattered into him, trying to tackle him. He actually wasn't. What Davinson Sanchez had done, and you've got to be fair to him here, he's come across and had perfectly got himself into the position to block what should have been Lacazette's shot. However, Lacazette absolutely slices that ball. Absolutely, if there was no one near, if no one had actually been near him at that point, that would have been one of the misses of the season in the way he absolutely shanked it. It was going off. And the fact that he sliced it has then prevented that ball from hitting Sanchez's leg to be the perfect block, and instead Lacazette has clumped Sanchez's foot or leg, and then obviously he's gone down. And what I find bewildering is that Michael Oliver was so determined in his decision, and then from what I understand, because of the way he made that decision, VAR then couldn't overrule it, which I don't understand. I must admit, cards on the table, I don't understand the ruling and the logic behind that, but I've heard it said now by various places. I think on Match of the Day they said it, and also I think Dermot Gallagher also explained it as well. There's something within it, I'm sure someone can help me in the comments below, but I think it's to do with the clear and obvious error side of things. that VAR then couldn't intervene. And likewise, apparently, if he'd said it wasn't a penalty, they couldn't intervene, whatever they thought of it, which I find baffling. It kind of, for me, that's kind of the point of VAR, is to actually make those big decisions correct in those moments. But yeah, I thought that was incredibly harsh. And like I say, even I think Lacazette, to be utterly fair to him, I think he said it in the interview as well afterwards. It was quite fortunate to be a penalty. So I didn't think Sanchez had a bad game, to be honest. I thought it just sounds one of these weird. Someone's told me afterwards, like, how can you say that him and Alderweireld had a good game when Spurs conceded 2 goals? And the reasoning is, for the first goal, yes, I mean, I think there's an unfortunate element to it. Yes, I have no idea why he was unmarked, Odegaard. But as a touch of misfortune, hitting Alderweireld kind of gets his legs to it to block it, but it skews off him and wrong foots Lloris. But obviously, like I say, the second one really, I don't kind of see why it's going to be a. I don't think that, for me, is a defensive mistake. I think it's a mistake by the officials. But yeah, these things happen. Like I say, I don't think it's a game-changing thing. I think Spurs essentially had messed it up themselves. But yeah, what I would say is that there was a mistake before it that I think obviously needs to be touched upon. That's a poor distribution by Hugo Lloris. That led to it. That wasn't great at all. And obviously as well, it wasn't a game changer. It just wasn't. This is the thing. That's why I don't really want to harp on it too much, because I think for me, ultimately, Spurs were their own kind of caused their own downfall, really. And I don't think that spot kick really should have changed the game in that aspect at all. But, I mean, looking forward, let's stop dwelling on it now. Let's look forward. I think for me, a key man to get back will be Giovanni Lo Celso. Giovanni Lo Celso, I think, is going to be an important thing for Mourinho in not overplaying the rest of his team. Certainly on Dembele, I think it gives him another option for him when he's fitter. I think also when Son came off, I think that gives him another option on the left of that attacking midfield, or even as a number 10. I think Spurs have missed him. I think he's getting a bit of flack right now in the same way Lamela did for various, injuries and the frustrations of that. He's had a bit of a nightmare. He's had his serious hamstring injury, and then he's come back, and because of almost not rushing back, but in the work that he's doing to up his fitness as quickly as he can, he's kind of hurt his back a bit. It sounds really awful to say it like that. That kind of, sorry, someone reversing outside my window, which isn't perfect, but there you go. It's like, it's just one of the things when you push yourself, I think, to after he's been out for, almost 3 months. So he's pushing himself, and he's kind of got some discomfort in his back. I don't think it'll be long till he's playing again, but I do think that he's actually going to be quite an important player for Mourinho to be able to rotate these options. I do wonder what it means for other people on the bench. Steven Bergwijn can't even get on the bench at the moment. I feel like he'll probably start in midweek in Croatia, but yeah, I think, I always get someone asking me every week, loads of people, why is this person not on the bench? But I think in terms of attacking options, Gio Lo Celso was keeping Dele Alli off the bench, really, in the first half of the season. So there may be times where Dele doesn't get on the bench and people are going to create stories, oh my God, but, or Vinicius might not get on the bench, or Lamela, or Lucas, and that's the crazy thing of it. But yeah, I wanted to kind of look forward a little bit slightly to this summer as well. Because I just don't want to talk about Sunday anymore, maybe. But I think it's going to be a really interesting summer, because I do think they need to continue with the revamp, the rebuild, whatever you'll call it. But unfortunately, and this is where people hate me for going into a non-positive thing, but Spurs need money. Spurs financially are absolutely stuffed, as 99% of football clubs are out there right now. You've only got the mega rich ones that are really going to survive this pandemic without having a nightmare. I've had some people saying, "Oh yeah, but Spurs, the stadium's a game changer. It's meant to be the game changer." It's only a game changer if people can use it. It's like, of all the time Spurs had built this £1.2 billion complex, obviously loaned up to the eyeballs to get it, but with the obvious understanding that the match day revenue was going to be incredible. The concerts you could put on, the events, everything, the fans you could have in that stadium, the merchandise, the food, the drink, everything would be huge. And then the world decided, nah, gutted. It's almost, you can imagine Nelson from The Simpsons going, ha ha. You can't use that stadium for, what are we now? We're going past a year now, aren't we? So the game changer has essentially ended up being this weight around their necks that they're having to pay off with no income coming in whatsoever. And I was looking at, I think it was an interview with the Richard Masters of the Premier League, and he was saying the TV rebate of money going to have to be paid back is going to be roughly in the range of, I think he said £2 billion amongst the Premier League clubs, because what was meant, I think the hope was that, it was just going to be, the last third or whatever, last quarter of last season. It's now going to be, barring hopefully the last two matches of the season, it's going to be another pretty much full season without fans inside grounds, and thus this kind of TV showing every game, people not having to subscribe, all this sort of stuff for extra, not having to pay for extra games, as it were. So there's going to be a huge rebate paid. And so Tottenham, for all of the progress they were making, when they were starting to make these record profits, they were starting to build themselves up, there's no money. And I know people don't like Daniel Levy, and I know people don't like the board, they don't like the way the club's being run, they don't like, certainly I agree that you can criticise some of the transfer policies and management policies in hiring and firing over the years, but I think blaming a club for a lack of funding during a pandemic that's gone on for a year and has left their huge new stadium, the game-changing stadium, completely empty and unusable. I mean, come on. I know I'm going to get flack for that. I always do, because people think I'm making some kind of apology for Daniel Levy or the board or something. I don't know why I'm making horse noises, but I don't know. I can't see how that is their fault. And so that is why this summer there's going to be no funds for transfers in place. Any funds will have to come from player sales. And that's, yes, some people have said, that's always been the case. It hasn't technically always been the case. There have been little bits of funds there, but we do forget they were building a stadium for much of those years, yes. And again, not jumping on any pro-board, Levy bandwagons, whatever you'd like me to pigeonhole me into. Yes, there have been transfer decisions made, mistakes made. But I can kind of understand this one. But the key for Tottenham is going to be kind of almost, how do you raise those funds? Who goes? You hear me harping on boringly about the homegrown issues, the foreign player limit. So that still has to be continued to be addressed this summer. Probably the best way to look at it is, I think, certainly players are going to have to be looked for that are in certain contract situations, like Højbjerg was. Obviously we know Spurs have said this before, have got an interest in Marcel Sabitzer. He's coming into the last year of his contract. He's the kind of player that, if they could do some kind of cheaper deal with some funds having come in, then they look at it. I think he'll be an in-demand player. I think that'll be a tough one to do, but why not? I saw Yannick Vestergaard at Southampton linked in the week. From what I understand, he's not a player, despite the fact that he is also coming into that same situation. I understand that he's not someone that Spurs are currently looking at. I think maybe that's come about because of the Højbjerg connection and doing a similar deal. I think I even saw Paulo Dybala linked today. Yes, of course Spurs have had an interest in Dybala in the past, but even with just a year left on his contract, you're looking at big money. Spurs would have to, that would be a deal I think they'd look at if they sold a superstar, to be honest, which is not really what we want. But, who knows what this summer's going to bring. This is the thing. If Spurs desperately need money, and if it's Mourinho is still there, or whoever, I probably think, I don't know. I don't want to speculate too much on the managerial situation, but if Mourinho is still there, then you'd imagine he will want to continue to shape the team in his own image, and have less days like they did on Sunday, where he didn't feel they were doing what he wanted them to do. But yeah, someone like Dybala, I think I saw some of the figures, 40, 50 million. Spurs don't have that. The last window, in the summer window, Spurs had to do like really clever deals. They had to really do stuff in instalments, backload stuff. It was all had to be really well put together. And money has to come in. For those to happen. I mean, so you look at the contracts that people are up. Obviously, this year we've got Danny Rose will be gone, so that's whatever his wages are off the wage bill. Cameron Carter-Vickers comes to the end of his deal. I don't know whether there's an option to extend his by a year. Spurs might take that potentially if they look. I mean, he's now regularly starting under Jonathan Woodgate at Bournemouth. So there's been talk that Bournemouth might want to sign him. So Spurs might invoke that just so they get a little bit of a transfer fee. And then the 2022 contracts, bearing in mind Spurs do not want to be burned again like they did with Eriksen. So they're not going to I wouldn't imagine they'll let many, if any, contracts go into that last year. You've got Lloris, Aurier, Lamela, Hart and Gazaniga, all 2022 contracts. So Lloris, I think there's a big decision to be made there. I think the big problem again is it's all very well saying, I don't know, this is hypothetical. Let's say Lloris goes to PSG. They're not going to get a huge fee for a guy who, 32, 33 in the last year of his contract. So, someone might throw Nick Pope, I don't know, as a suggestion as coming back. But he's a 29-year-old that apparently is valued by Burnley at somewhere near 50 million. Not going to happen like that. Not going to happen. So Lloris's replacement has to be, if he were to go, has to be someone that's not in a higher price bracket. And then you start to look at it and you think, is it worth spending low money on a goalkeeper who might not be an improvement on a Hugo Lloris? You see what I mean? You kind of run into that issue. I mean, Serge Aurier, I think a decision will have to be made there. Whether he obviously wanted to leave, not last summer, but the one before, and with no contract renewal in sight. This is the problem as well, as with the financial stuff. And Spurs are probably going to have to wait until the summer until they can look at their budget entirely, see what money is definitely coming in, whether the world has opened up again to normality, whether they know they can count on certain amounts of TV revenue, gate receipts, and then they put final touches to any contracts that may have been prepared and ready earlier in the season. And with Aurier, do you decide, I don't know, you look at the homegrown issue, do you decide, we let Aurier go? And obviously there'll be people out there going, no, let Matt Doherty go. But I don't think you probably do let a guy go that quickly after signing him. Maybe Aurier, you look at it and you think you can make a little bit more money on. And then, I don't know, maybe you look to spend a similar-ish sum on someone like Max Aarons, who obviously has, is developing really nicely at Norwich under Daniel Farke and could come in as a homegrown right back to work with Doherty, to work with Tanganga, whoever. And Lamela. Lamela's a tough one. Lamela, I like Lamela. I think he's difficulties that have been out of his control a lot of the time. But I suppose for a club, you've got to look at it and you think, do we offer him? He absolutely adores Tottenham Hotspur. Do we offer him a new, almost like a pay-as-you-play kind of deal? I do think we're going to come into a world where a lot of new player contracts might even be less than the players have been on before. And I'm not talking about Spurs, I'm talking about blanket across. I think so many clubs, I think we kind of detach ourselves slightly and we look at, like Dybala thing today, 50 million and all this sort of stuff. And I think sometimes we detach ourselves from the reality of what's really going on at clubs. I think players will also, and agents will be realising, gone are the days probably, barring 3 or 4 clubs, where they can look at it and say, I can take my client elsewhere and get him more money. I don't think that happens now. I think that actually is going to become, I think players are going to have to take less. And I wonder whether someone like Lamela's case, whether that's also the deal, where if he were to stay, he stays on a reduced contract. I don't know, I'm just kind of spitballing here. But I do think that's going to be something like even places like Man City, I don't think players will be getting bigger contracts than they've been on. I really do believe that's going to be a thing. So that also it becomes, I suppose, a little bit of a battle of which clubs offer what and who actually can. But I think there's a lot of decisions to be made there. Obviously, Gazaniga, I think there's no shocker they'd let him go there. You do wonder whether Joe Hart, they'd keep him on. Like I say, you'd probably keep him to the end of his contract anyway, as an experienced kind of head there. But yeah, sorry, that sounded really depressing. But it's not depressing. It's not entirely depressing, because sometimes out of these situations, kind of little opportunities arise. So say Oliver Skipp. Oliver Skipp will come back in the summer, and from everything I'm hearing, Spurs are so happy with him. Mourinho wanted him back in January. He's been. I watched him again. Watched his game against Sheffield Wednesday at the weekend. He was brilliant. Got an assist as well. But he is developing into everything a Mourinho wants in a player. And this is a big statement. And people are going to go, oh, you absolute muppet, why are you saying it? But I think Skipp and Højbjerg, say, play on Sunday in the centre of the pitch. I don't think Spurs lose that game. And I know that's a big call, and I know there'll be people saying, it's the Championship. But you can just tell with a player just how good he's going to be and how confident and how he's currently performing, and you can translate that into the same situation. And I think he's going to be a huge player for Spurs in the years to come. You know, I've always bigged up Oliver Skipp because, like I say, I've been very fortunate to see a lot of him since he was, I think, probably saw him playing at 16 first. You know, he's now 20 and he's smashing it. He's going to end up the season with a promotion-winning medal, and I think Spurs will want to keep him, especially with the homegrown angle as well. So there's him. There's Ryan Sessegnon could come back. Whether there's as much space for Ryan Sessegnon to fit in is another thing. You know, we hope that Reguilon will stick around and Madrid won't invoke that buyback clause. So if he sticks around, and then you've got, I don't think Davies is likely to go anywhere anytime soon. So that maybe means that possibly another season on loan for Sessegnon, but you never know with the homegrown angle, perhaps. So yeah, opportunities arise for them as well. Foyth is starting very regularly now for Villarreal. Emery's using him in right back, central midfield. He was back at centre back last weekend. They've got that permanent option to take him. I'd be surprised if they don't, because it's not a big fee. I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was around 13 million, something like that, maybe 15. And I think in the market that we're currently in, I think Villarreal will probably take that because I think it'll be worth a lot more in a year or two's time. So you probably can't count him into this discussion. But, you know, I'm not saying that, oh yeah, we don't need transfers, Tottenham, because you've got Skipp and Sessegnon coming out. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think, especially for Skipp, I think it opens up an opportunity for him to be a big player that Spurs don't have to pay anything for. Essentially, Norwich and Daniel Farke have done a wonderful job in developing it into a Premier League player. He's ready for it now. He really is. I see sometimes people still doubting him, and I don't think they've actually watched what he's done. I think they're still judging him on his youthful, inexperienced performances last year for Spurs and whatever. Watch him in the Championship. Honestly, he's dominating matches. His reading of the game, his anticipation is absolutely top notch. So yeah, honestly, Skippy next year is going to be the man. I really do believe it. You know, I hope it's at Tottenham. I hope Norwich desperately, and the fans and Farke and the club all want him to come back and play in the Premier League for them for another season. I think he will play regularly for Spurs if he comes back. We don't know what the future holds for Harry Winks and whether he wants to move on in the summer. I think if Skipp were to stay, I think that probably would be the case. And maybe that's where Spurs get some of that money back in the summer. You know, I don't leap on the criticism of Harry Winks. I think he just hasn't really found his role yet. But Spurs might look at that, and a player who, you know, Man City have wanted in recent seasons as well, because other clubs have got homegrown issues as well and want to bring in British players. And you maybe find that Winks frees up money and stuff like that. But there you go. But I've hopped on for a long time. I think we've covered everything. We've gone from the highs and the lows, mostly lows, unfortunately. But yeah, I think this summer's going to be an interesting one. I think the plans are going to have to very much, don't they always seem to depend on departures? But I think I've just got this feeling we might see the departure of someone we don't want to. And I don't know who that is. I think it may be a case of, I don't think that's defined either. I think it may be a case of Spurs just having to take that plunge if they were to get a really good offer for someone that they don't really want to let go too much, but they know would then fund the rebuild. Whether Mourinho and Levy between them decide that it has to be done, I don't know. God, I really don't want to end on that depressing note, but I think, unfortunately, this is the kind of world we're living in now. Finance is not there. Money needs to be made. And sometimes teams just do need a rebuild, a refresh. Players have to go, however popular and however important they may be. Sometimes it has to happen just in order to move on in the future, whether we like it or not. Some players I do believe are irreplaceable, but that has to unfortunately be found out in certain ways, doesn't it? But there you go. So this week, Dinamo Zagreb, very strange match now, as their manager's just been sentenced to almost 5 years in prison, and he's resigned. So all a bit chaotic there. I think we'll see a kind of pretty much a much changed lineup. Obviously, it's going to be away, but without the fans. I think, like I say, you'll see the likes of Bergwijn, Winks, Sissoko, people like that come in. Maybe even Joe Hart starts in goal. We'll see. And then Aston Villa, tough game. Jack Grealish is going to be back for them by the sounds of it. Spurs have got this rubbish record since dating back to when they were top of the table. Since that moment in December, they have not beat. They've lost every single game against the top half team. 7 in the Premier League, 7 in the Premier League, and Everton in the FA Cup. And obviously, they really need to turn that around against Aston Villa. That's a shocking statistic. It really is. Whether it's with Son or not, I don't know. Like I said at the top of this, that's a big decision to be made, and obviously how that also influences the international break. But Spurs could do with putting a decent performance in midweek, getting that momentum back on track again, and then, they can't let... The Arsenal games needs to be a hiccup, not a momentum shifter. Can't forget they won 5 in a row, and that was good. It was all positive, and this can't be allowed to drag them back into what they were before that. They need to kind of shake themselves, slap themselves in the face, crack straight back on with things, because the matches are tough. They've got 3 or 4, I think it was 4 including Arsenal away in a row, and then you've got Man United, and then you've got Everton, I think, coming up after that. And then the Carabao Cup final. So Spurs can't afford to kind of wallow. They need to just crack straight back on and get back to the free-flowing football that was pretty cool to watch in recent weeks, because they just need to. Results went for them. Isn't that always the case with Spurs? When results go for Spurs, they don't take advantage of it. But the byproduct is, yes, it means they're not completely off the pace. It hasn't stuffed them entirely, that defeat, although it's incredibly disappointing. God, the amount of times I've had to kind of, before I'm going to say a word that probably isn't suitable. But yeah, they've just now got to catch back up, get some momentum going, and try and put away some of these rubbish stats that have been coming up as well about top half teams. That shouldn't be the case with the quality in Tottenham's team. So fingers crossed we get something a little bit better. And the next one of these I can be back to happy Alistair and talking about good stuff. And yes, I did just refer to myself in the third person, which is very cringeworthy, so I apologise for that. But anyway, as always, stay safe, stay healthy, look after yourselves, and I shall catch you later. Bye.